They say the sea never forgets, it remembers every ship, every journey, every story of resistance. In the azure waters of the Mediterranean in 2025, dozens of civilian vessels, some carrying oxygen concentrators, medicines, food, cameras, journalists, set sail for Gaza, seeking to pierce what they call an illegal naval blockade. They called it the global Sumud Flotilla, Sumud meaning steadfastness. The world watched as Israel's navy intercepted, drones hovered overhead, communications were jammed, explosions rattled hulls, and activists held their hands high in nonviolent protest. What was once a distant headline became a crucible, a collision of law, politics, identity, and human suffering. In this narrative, we'll unpack the Israel-Palestine conflict, the blockade on Gaza, the history of flotillas, and the latest mission, its strategy, risks, legal arguments, voices on board, and the possible fallout. Because in every wave, there is a story. And in every story, there lies a choice, to stand, or to look away. 1. Historical roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict. To understand why a flotilla matters, we must begin with the deep roots of this conflict. Imperial legacy and partition. The territory known today as Israel and Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire until World War I. After the war, it came under British mandate, and tensions between Jewish and Arab nationalist movements grew. In 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan to create separate Jewish and Arab states. The Jewish leadership accepted it, the Arab side largely rejected it. In 1948, Israel declared independence, triggering the First Arab-Israel War, and displacing 700,000 Palestinians. Occupation and territorial divisions. In 1967, Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and other territories in the Six-Day War. The occupation of these territories, and subsequent settlement expansion, checkpoints, the separation wall, and control of borders and movement have defined decades. Gaza's unique status. The Gaza Strip, a small coastal enclave, has been under Israeli blockade, border, air, and sea, effectively since 2007, when Hamas took control of the territory. Israel and Egypt enforce strict controls on materials entering Gaza, claiming security concerns, especially weapons smuggling. Critics argue that this constitutes collective punishment. Cycles of war and suffering. Since 2007, several wars have erupted between Israel and Hamas/Palestinian militants, 2008, 09, 2012, 2014, 2021, and the ongoing war since October 2023. Each time, the civilian toll has soared, deaths, infrastructure destruction, displacement, famine threats, health crises. International law and humanitarian principles. Israel, as an occupying power, is legally bound by the Fourth Geneva Convention and other laws of armed conflict to ensure that civilians in occupied territory receive humanitarian relief. Yet, critics contend that Israel's blockade and restrictions violate these obligations. Thus, the Israel-Palestine conflict is not just a matter of discrete skirmishes or peace talks, but of occupation, inequality, identity, displacement, and international norms. 2. Gaza blockade, humanitarian crisis, and the rationale for a flotilla. To appreciate why activists risk everything at sea, one must understand the situation in Gaza. The blockade regime. Since 2007, Israel has restricted nearly all sea access to Gaza, citing security threats. Goods, materials, and aid must pass through tightly controlled land crossings, subject to Israeli permission and frequent closure. Gaza's fishing zone is limited. The naval blockade is enforced with Israeli naval vessels intercepting ships heading toward Gaza. Consequences on civilian life. The blockade has heavily constrained imports of food, fuel, medical supplies, building materials, and electricity. Combined with recurrent wars, Gaza faces infrastructural collapse, healthcare degradation, water and sanitation crises, and loss of livelihoods. The food insecurity has soared, famine or acute hunger warnings have emerged. Why a maritime route? Land crossings are controlled or blockaded, the sea, for many activists, symbolizes a corridor of hope. A flotilla, civilian, unarmed vessels aiming to deliver aid, can bypass or challenge the blockade, force international attention, raise pressure, and assert that Gaza's civilians deserve relief not subject to politics or war. Precedents and lessons. The concept of flotillas to Gaza is not new. In 2010, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, including the Mavi Marmara, attempted to break the blockade. Israel's raid left 9 Turkish activists dead and sparked global outrage. Wikipedia. +2. Al Jazeera. +2. Since then, multiple smaller flotillas have been attempted, 2011, 2015, 2018, various 2025 attempts, but consistently intercepted. Human Rights at Sea. +4. Al Jazeera. +4. Jerusalem Post. +4. Advocates argue that each attempt adds moral and legal weight, each interception becomes a test of international law, and each act of civilian resistance reframes the narrative from warfare to humanitarian obligation. 3. The Sumud Flotilla, Origins, Structure, and Strategy. In mid-2025, several flotilla initiatives merged into one ambitious effort, the Global Sumud Flotilla, GSF. What is Sumud? The term Sumud, Arabic, steadfastness, is central to Palestinian identity and resistance. It evokes resilience, rootedness, remaining in place under hardship. Naming the project Sumud Flotilla reclaims resistance not as aggression but as endurance. Coalitions and organizations. The GSF is not a government mission but a civilian, NGO-driven initiative combining the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, an umbrella for earlier flotilla missions. Global Movement to Gaza. The Maghreb Sumud Flotilla, North Africa-based solidarity missions. Sumud Nusantara, a Southeast Asia-based convoy from Malaysia, etc. These bodies pooled resources, networks, logistical support, and ideological coherence. Scale and scope. The GSF is the largest flotilla mission attempted thus far, more than 40 vessels, 500 participants, representing 44+ countries. Some vessels departed from Barcelona, Otranto, Genoa, others from Sicily, Syros, Greece, and Tunisia. The flotilla's stated mission: deliver food, water, medicine, open a humanitarian sea corridor, break or challenge the naval blockade, draw global attention, pressure states to act, preparation, training, roles. On board, volunteers undergo training for interception scenarios, how to raise hands non-violently, how to maintain composure, avoid provocation, how to respond to boarding. Roles include cooks, medical personnel, communications, security observers, navigational support, media/journalists. Organizers emphasize the nonviolent principle: peaceful, unarmed, civilian presence. Routes and rendezvous. A multi-leg journey, ships departed from different ports, converging near Malta or in the Mediterranean before sailing together toward Gaza. Tunisia, Gammarth, Sidi Bou Said, is a key staging point. Some boats join from Italy and Greece, then attempt to penetrate the naval blockade near the Gaza coastline. 4. The journey, interceptions, and encounters at sea. The flotilla's journey has been fraught with challenges, confrontations, and maneuvers. Departure and early legs. The first ships left Barcelona on August 31, 2025. The fleet encountered storms and delays, requiring regrouping at ports such as Tunis. In Sidi Bou Said, militants claimed drone attacks targeted vessels docked there, e.g. the Alma. In multiple instances, the flotilla reported explosions, drone harassment, communication jamming, and interference. Incidents, collisions, and confrontations. Activists recounted hearing explosions, seeing drones drop flares or popper devices onto decks. Some communication systems were reportedly hijacked or jammed, GPS and satellite links were disrupted. Israeli naval vessels stationed ahead of Gaza threatened to intercept any attempt to reach territorial waters. On October 2, 2025, Israel intercepted the flotilla in international waters. Most vessels were boarded, detained, and diverted to Ashdod, Israel. One vessel, Makino, reportedly evaded interception and reached Palestinian territorial waters, before contact was lost. Some activists described being sprayed with water cannons, stun grenades, and physically dragged aboard. Aftermath, detentions, deportations. Israeli authorities announced that participants would be deported, not prosecuted, in many cases, and claimed the flotilla had knowingly entered a combat zone. Many detainees were held in port in Ashdod. Governments, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, Ireland, expressed demands for their safe return. Protesters across global cities, Rome, Brussels, Berlin, Istanbul, mobilized in solidarity. Legal debates erupted. Was Israel's boarding in international waters lawful? Did the ships carry contraband or weapons? Was it collective punishment? Voices aboard. Videos and first-hand accounts from on board the flotilla report a day's rhythm: early morning check-ins, night watch, prayer, media updates, workshops, training drills, tension, anxiety. Many participants see themselves as human shields, bearing witness, making visible the human face of Gaza's suffering. High-profile figures joined: Greta Thunberg, Ada Kolo, Liam Cunningham. Some activists faced psychological strain, the knowledge that at any moment, their vessel could be boarded, communications cut, or worse. 5. Legal, political, and moral questions. The Sumud Flotilla raises contested issues across legal, political, and moral domains. International law and maritime law. Under the San Remo Manual and customary international law, blockades may be lawful under certain conditions: notification, impartiality, not depriving civilians of necessities. The legality depends on proportionality, humanitarian exceptions, and enforcement. Does Israel's blockade violate the Fourth Geneva Convention's obligation to ensure that relief reaches civilians in occupied territory? Were the flotilla vessels in international waters? If so, was boarding them lawful? The activists argue yes. The Israeli side contests sovereign security rights. Did the flotilla carry contraband, weapons, or dual-use materials? Israel claims militants could smuggle arms disguised as aid. Are the interception and detention acts tantamount to illegal embargo or collective punishment? Critics say yes. The Israeli position: the flotilla sought to breach a blockade for a territory under a declared combat zone, thus security overrides. Political dynamics and sovereignty. Israel's naval blockade is de facto assertion of control over Gaza's coastline. Critics say it amounts to annexation. The flotilla exerts pressure on states, media, and moral conscience, forcing governments to position themselves. It remaps the narrative, from security versus terror to rights versus siege. It also tests Western governments' willingness to confront Israel over humanitarian obligations. Moral implications. Civilians in Gaza bear the brunt of warfare, with limited avenues for relief. Flotillas challenge the indifference. The presence of civilians at sea, perhaps in harm's way, raises ethical questions of solidarity, risk, and symbolic action. The imagery, hands raised, boats sailing toward danger, seeks to shift public sentiment, to humanize beyond statistics. Risks and criticisms. Some critics call flotillas symbolic theater, strategically provocative, risking escalation. There's danger to participants: violence, legal retaliation, detention. Some argue these missions politicize aid, reducing it to activism rather than neutral relief. State actors may exploit or co-opt such missions for their agendas. Media, messaging, and narrative control. Ensuring live streams, social media updates, press coverage, onboard journalists, the mission depends heavily on real-time communication. Conversely, interference, signal jamming, drone intimidation are part of the contest for narrative control. States on both sides vie to frame the story: security threat or humanitarian resistance. 6. Mapping the stakeholders and their motives. In this conflict, no actor is monolithic. Every party has internal pressures, international considerations, and strategic aims. Israel. Security narrative: Hamas and militant groups are designated as terrorists, the blockade and naval enforcement are framed as defensive against arms smuggling. International legitimacy: Israel must defend its actions legally, arguing they conform with self-defense and maritime law. Diplomatic survival: facing global criticism, Israel must manage alliances, US, Europe, and responses to flotilla pressure. Domestic politics: hardline stances often yield political capital, but losses of activist lives or global condemnation can be politically sensitive. Palestinians/Hamas/Gaza authorities. Resistance legitimacy: flotillas reinforce the narrative of occupation, siege, and Palestinian endurance, Sumud. Humanitarian survival: aid corridors are lifelines, any break in blockage means supplies, hope, and morale. Public diplomacy: the flotilla helps amplify Palestinian voices globally, circumventing media blackouts and framing. Negotiating leverage: successful missions could shift bargaining power in future ceasefires or negotiations. Activists, NGOs, and solidarity coalitions. Moral agency: these actors claim moral legitimacy to act where states fail. Visibility and fundraising: media and public attention bring resources, volunteers, and pressure. Network building: collaborations across countries enhance global solidarity movements, e.g. Sumud Nisantra, Maghreb, Freedom Flotilla. Risk management: ensuring participants' safety, legal defense, and media impact are central to their strategies. State actors and third parties, UN, foreign governments. Balancing act: states may support Israel's security concerns publicly, while facing domestic and international pressure to condemn humanitarian breaches. UN and humanitarian institutions, entities like UNRWA, UN OCHA, Red Crescent, etc., play roles in documenting, advocating, verifying. Regional players, Egypt, Turkey, South Africa, EU countries, etc. Their positions, statements, port permissions, and diplomatic reactions heavily influence outcomes. Media and civil society. Framing matters: headlines, visuals, boats, flags, stars and stripes, Palestinian kids, opinions sway public sentiment. Information warfare: disinformation, propaganda, signal jamming, censorship, and selective leakages all influence public perception. 7. Possible futures: worst case, best case, and most likely. What happens next depends on a delicate balance of force, law, diplomacy, and public pressure. Here are scenarios. Worst case scenario. Violent confrontation: Israeli forces use lethal force in boarding or engagements, casualties among activists spark international crisis. Escalation to war: a flotilla incident becomes a flashpoint, prompting further fighting in Gaza or on borders. Crackdown and repression: Israel tightens maritime enforcement, restricts all ships, penalizes NGOs. Diplomatic fallout: allies distance themselves, leaving flotilla actors isolated, diplomatic isolation for those states blocking condemnation. Humanitarian rupture: Gaza's blockade becomes more rigid, aid access further restricted. Best case scenario. Partial success: one or more vessels reach Gaza and deliver significant aid, opening a precedent. International pressure forces easing: states demand Israel lift or ease its blockade, triggering diplomatic or legal constraints. Legal victories: courts or international tribunals rule in favor of unimpeded humanitarian access, constraining Israel's enforcement tactics. Political momentum: global solidarity and uprising of public opinion push governments to adopt tougher stances, leading to a negotiated ceasefire or loosening of the siege. Long-term corridor: a sustained maritime humanitarian corridor is accepted or tolerated, becoming a new lifeline for Gaza. Most likely scenario: mid-path. Interception and limited delivery: Israel intercepts most vessels but allows some minimal aid transfers or controlled entry via intermediaries. Legal limbo: courts may challenge some elements, but enforcement remains contested. Diplomatic backlash. Israel faces condemnation and political pressure in many countries, but few willing to enforce sanctions. Humanitarian strain continues. Gaza gets limited relief, but structural crisis endures. Flotilla as catalyst. Even if failed in the strict sense, the mission amplifies voices, shifts narratives, and builds momentum for future actions. Measuring impact. What success looks like. Because with activism, metrics matter. What does success mean for the Sumud Flotilla? Symbolic and narrative victory. If a flotilla forces headlines, compels governments to respond, injects imagery of solidarity into global discourse, it shifts the Overton window on Gaza. Images of peaceful civilians confronting naval blockades can alter public sentiment and moral calculus. Legal and normative weight. If courts or tribunals take up the case, rulings against Israel's enforcement could set precedents. Each interception becomes a potential test case under international law that strengthens the legal argument for humanitarian access. Material delivery. Even small volumes of medicine, food, water reaching Gaza via sea, through docking or transfer, would bolster morale, save lives, and break the siege's narrative. Pressure on state actors. Governments may feel compelled to issue statements, sanction, negotiate, or at least re-evaluate their support. Domestic politics, public opinion, may force stronger stances in Congress, parliaments, or electoral arenas. Network and movement building. Strengthened global civil society coalitions, sustained activism, fundraising, volunteer recruitment, and future initiatives, overland convoys, advocacy, legal campaigns, can build lasting pressure. Precedent for future missions. If the GSF demonstrates new tactics, better coordination, or innovative defense against interception, future flotillas might learn, adapt, and become more resilient. Challenges, criticisms, and internal tensions. No bold initiative is immune to scrutiny. The Sumud Flotilla faces several internal and external challenges. Risk versus safety. Volunteers are exposed to violence, imprisonment, injury. Organizers must balance daring with prudence. Some critics argue risking lives for symbolic gains is irresponsible. Maintaining nonviolence. In high-stress boarding, confrontation, or chaotic conditions, keeping discipline among dozens of ships and hundreds of participants is a tall order. Coordination and communication. Signal jamming, drone interference, navigational disruptions, and logistics complicate coordination. Delays, storm damage, mechanical failures, port access, all present operational headwinds. Funding and resources. Boats, fuel, equipment, legal backup, risk insurance, media gear, medical kits, all cost. Sustaining financing is a hurdle. Some critics accuse flotillas of branding-based fundraising more than actual relief delivery.